Hi, a very warm welcome to this episode of the Ideas Factory. On the Ideas Factory, every week we discuss the big geopolitical events that are affecting our world, affecting India, and we have Professor Harsh Pant to analyze some of those big events this week. I am Naghma, and thank you so much for joining on this episode of the Ideas Factory. The world has witnessed a very grand celebration of the 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, which was full of pageantry, pomp and show. We heard Xi Jinping and the whole celebration of the Communist Party, which reiterates the grandeur and then presents the party as the only savior of China. The country has to follow whatever the party says, so that China keeps progressing on this road of being the biggest power in the world. So all that harsh, but as you actually look into it, you see that the Communist Party, or there is an increasing realization that the Communist Party is more and more about Xi Jinping now. He's been one of those rulers who's centralized power like never before. Though he talks of the party and how the party is the savior, how has the party really transformed under Xi Jinping? What has been your analysis when you look at these 100 years of Communist Party and what it was earlier, what it is now, and how has Xi Jinping managed to make himself almost the only person in the party?
Yes, thank you, Naghma. I think it has been a remarkable transformation from the idea of infusing this bringing together the party and the state, and now you almost have a man and the party and the state all being or the attempt being made to roll them into one entity, or almost projecting Xi Jinping as the not only the central face of the party, but perhaps the idea that China today stands not on CCP as much as it stands on Xi Jinping's shoulders. And it was, I think, it has been a remarkable transformation, because one of the strengths of the CCP's endurance, the Chinese Communist Party's endurance, has been its flexibility, its ability to adapt. The lessons that it has been learning from the failures of communist parties elsewhere, in particular the Soviet Union, and the way they have developed institutional frameworks to manage that transition. That has been remarkable, and one has to acknowledge that for an institution as old as the CCP, it has been a phenomenal success in that sense, that even today it is regarded as the vanguard of Chinese aspirations, the way it has molded together various distinct groups in China towards a single ideological commitment that is now, of course, it's making China great again, or bringing China to the center of global politics. But what Xi Jinping has done is to centralize power to an extent which perhaps we had not witnessed since the days of Mao. And that is remarkable, because what the idea for a long time was that, look, China is being reformed, that China is opening up. From 1970s, when Americans embraced China, the whole idea was that China will eventually gravitate and become more like a traditional Western democracy, or a traditional democracy which is more open and engaged with the rest of the world. But what Chinese Communist Party has done is not only to open itself up economically, but to centralize power at the same time, which is I think something that needs to be studied much more substantively than the usual linkages that we were drawing in the earlier phases of democratization theory. That, look, eventually economic liberalization will lead to political liberalization. That has not happened in China. There are no signs that is going to happen anytime soon. And also, the popularity of Chinese Communist Party remains what it is. So there are problems inside China, which of course does not get reflected outside. And in many ways, it was reflective of what in the speech itself. I found the speech by Xi Jinping, in fact, a lot of it was defensive for a party that should be more celebratory, that should be more open, that should be more, proud of its achievements on so many fronts. It was also a speech from Xi Jinping's, platform that we will bash heads of those who will bully us, etc. Almost a sense of insecurity that pervades, I think, the Chinese Communist Party, and Xi Jinping in particular, because he has centralized power to an extent that no one has done since Mao. So I'm sure he's aware of the challenge that he faces, but that's the route he has taken for himself, and the consequences will be for him to bear.
Though he's trying to present this, for his domestic audience and for within the country is strong, and they will bash the heads of anybody who's trying to threaten China. But internationally, especially the last year and this year, China has been isolated diplomatically, related to COVID-19 in the way it handled the virus. So we see a very defensive China there, and now China has reached or come away from the century of humiliation to now being entering the phase of great rejuvenation. As you said, all these reflected in his speech, and it was more defensive, like you point out. Now, Harsh, I would like to. There has been a lot of interest and a lot of worry and concern on what we saw last week, the drone attack or an attempted drone attack in Jammu on the Air Force station. This is a new security challenge and a new threat, of course, for India, because it's very difficult to apprehend the drones, and we still are in the process of getting the technology. But more than the security challenges, it also kind of shows that there is, points towards the difficulty of separating Kashmir issue from the geopolitics, because fingers are pointing towards Lashkar from this being planned beyond across the border. Then the whole Taliban, Afghanistan conundrum, all this comes into play as far as Jammu Kashmir is concerned. How do you see this threat?
Yes, Nagma, if I can just say one more word about what you said on China, which is I
Yeah,
think
sure.
the idea that look, this is a moment where Chinese Communist Party is rightfully celebrating a lot of its achievements over the last few years, and the achievements have been quite remarkable, to be very honest. I mean, no other country has put so many people out of poverty. No other country has been able to manage such a huge transition in such a small period of time. But I think this, as you were pointing out, the whole sense of vulnerability is also present, because in the last year, especially in the last year and a half, we have seen the world's narrative towards China changing, and that was also reflected in the speech. That he was almost telling off the world that look, Xi Jinping was very categorical that we have issues from Taiwan and Hong Kong, and we don't want anyone to interfere. But he recognizes that the way he has pushed these issues to the center of attention of global politics are doing more harm to China than say the whole Deng Xiaoping's idea of hiding her strength and biding her time. So I think those issues are there with China, and they will continue to be there with the Chinese Communist Party, given the nature of the Chinese Communist Party being centralized, very hierarchical. And now that the challenge for Xi Jinping would be how he manages that moving forward, given that he has taken the onus of bringing China out as a rising or a great power in the making. So I think the challenges are for him to bear. The on as you move towards towards India's western neighborhood, clearly the challenge in Kashmir continues to be very, very profound. As the attack, the drone attack symbolized, it continues to change, it continues to evolve, and technology is just one part of the problem. That you have, certainly now. Drones and drone technology, UAV technology has been part of the discussion for a very long time. That this is how conflict is going to change, because we have seen that in Syria, we have seen that in the Azerbaijan conflict and Armenia conflict, and I think military planners are aware of the consequences of what such a technology can do, especially when you have a situation where for India the state and non-state actors are fused, especially when you cannot really make the distinction in our neighborhood, and given the rapidly changing situation, both with regard to what is happening within Pakistan, a lot of flux there, as well as what is happening in the Afghanistan front, given the Taliban seem to be, coming back with a force, operating with a certain realization that they have given a good thrashing to the Americans, and Americans have withdrawn. So I think the calculations are being made, and as some of that gets reflected in the non-state actors that target India, I think we will see more audacious attempts to attacking India or to targeting India. But the idea here is that what can you do about a technology that is still evolving, and that still is at a very nascent stage when it comes to countering drones? So we know, India is working domestically, indigenously on a lot of technologies, as well as working with other partners to make sure that we have adequate technology to manage, if at all such scenarios come to fruition in the near future. But I think this challenge is going to mutate. This
Absolutely.
challenge is going to be much more potent than it has been in the past few years, and that's where we should keep our eyes on.
Absolutely. Also, the timing of this attempted attack, Hush. We, the much publicized meeting of the Jammu Kashmir leaders with Prime Minister Modi. So, any effort towards normalcy in the valley or around is always met with these kind of incidents, and it goes long back, right from, Vajpayee's bus journey to Lahore, and then Kargil followed, or Modi's stopover in Lahore in 2015, and then we had the Pathankot attack in early 2016. So every time there is an effort, even a small step towards peace and normalcy, we see this. So when there was talk of normalcy in the area and the political process starting, we saw that this happened. So it
Absolutely.
just points out towards the difficulty in that area.
Absolutely, and I think for India, and if you look at it politically, diplomatically, the position of Pakistan is untenable. It is not supported anywhere in the world. Imran Khan keeps on repeating that we will only talk if Article 370 is brought back. That's not going to happen. And therefore, for Pakistan, the only way in which you can keep the focus on this issue is to use some of its assets in targeting India in ways that are novel, right? Old ways are not working, because clearly Pakistan is under pressure from FATF, which we know has not been able to release Pakistan from its clutches, despite Pakistan making a lot of commitments. And the idea that India will relent and India will start talking, we have not seen that happening. India has made moves to a limited extent at normalizing LOC. So we have seen some pressure on the LOC being relieved. But beyond that, there is no opening in India as far as Kashmir issue is concerned. Even the stakeholders, domestic stakeholders, that for a long time were arguing that Article 370 will have to come back, have recognized it, right? We know the statements that have come from various political groupings in Kashmir. We have seen the outreach by Indian Prime Minister to the Kashmiri establishment, and the process is moving forward as far as India is concerned, with all its challenges with delimitation, electoral process, etc. So for Pakistan, therefore, how does it keep this in public eye, in public view? So it will keep on creating new situations. It will keep on using new assets, and that's something that India will have to be prepared for.
Yes, of course. When we look at India's diplomatic efforts with other countries, I would like your views on the significance of Foreign Minister Jaishankar's visit to Greece, and of course to the G20 ministerial meet in Italy. There were talks of cooperation on various fronts: we trade, commerce, on terrorism, also on vaccine cooperation. All of that. How significant, and what really came out of these two visits?
I think one has to look at these two visits partly from a multilateral platform, especially the Italy visit, but also from a bilateral point of view, where India has been engaging with the West much more substantively than in the past. And it is as India takes its relationship with EU forward, it's important for India to have its ducks in the row, as they say, with all the individual countries as well. So I think this outreach to individual European countries is equally important. And of course, in the case of Italy, it was a G20 platform which India used, but also pushed the bilateral agenda. And then I think with Italy, we are seeing lots of traction developing in a lot of spaces, especially in the Indo-Pacific. We are looking at new engagement with Italy. Italy is interested, much like other European partners, in its to showcase its own individual role in the Indo-Pacific. But we also, I think, what was interesting for me was also this Greece visit to Greece, because this came in. This is the first visit in 18 years, there are two elements there. One is that Greece has often been seen as a very close partner of China in the EU. So there is this interesting dynamic of India engaging Greece. Greece is a country where China runs support Piraeus, which is again very interesting. And Greece is, Chinese investments, Chinese profile is very high in Greece. So to reach out to Greece very, very publicly, And also, if you read the bilateral statement, it is about Indo-Pacific. That now Greece is also talking about from its Eastern Mediterranean perspective. What does it bring to the table when it comes to Indo-Pacific? So clearly, both there is Greece and India looking at each other in the contemporary context. But also important is the issue of Cyprus and the issue of Turkey, where we know Greece and Turkey have the Cyprus problem, and India and Turkish relations have not been that great. So therefore, for India to push those buttons in Greece and talk about Cyprus and other regional issues and other bilateral problems, I think is a sign that India is also reciprocating some of that dynamic which we have seen from Turkish side towards Pakistan. So this engagement also reflects that reality. But of course, the larger issue for India and the Greece remains that how the two sides can work in the larger EU framework and in the larger Indo-Pacific context, and that we saw happening during the visits and being underscored by Indian Foreign Minister.
All right, Harsh, there are a lot of viewers who've sent in questions and they want your views on a couple of issues. Like we said, we do not have time for many questions, but as promised, we will take a few questions. So there's a lot of interest in Afghanistan and the Taliban issue. And a couple of people actually have written in about this. Sachin Bora, Akshat Gandhi, Jenny Mishra, they all really want to know what kind of cooperation would there be at all with India and the Taliban when it comes to power, and what kind of policies India will follow if Taliban overtake power after American troops completely withdraw. So should India engage with Taliban? These are some of the questions that people want to understand. Your views, what are your views on it?
I think India should engage with Taliban, and I think India is engaging with the Taliban because of the simple reality that Taliban is going to be a very, very important player, whichever way Afghanistan evolves post American withdrawal. And Americans are withdrawing. We have seen this week the handing over of the Bagram base to Afghan security forces. So Americans are leaving, Western forces are leaving. And the question is under what conditions will they leave eventually? What will be the final political settlement, and what kind of a military posture America in particular will have around Afghanistan, in Afghanistan. And on that will depend India's engagement, I think, because a lot of India's equities are there in Afghanistan. India has invested so much in Afghanistan, and genuinely India believes that a stable Afghanistan that can stand on its own is one of the surest guarantors of regional security, because otherwise Pakistan gets a blank check, and that India certainly does not want, and it's detrimental to Afghanistan's future. So in that context, all the stakeholders become important for India, including Taliban, and therefore India has been reaching out to Taliban and having some initial back channel negotiations as to what can be done. But of course, it's all contingent upon what Taliban decide about their own future. If Taliban decide to go back to the kind of rule, the kind of governance structures that they had in the 1990s, then I don't think India can support or India can be a part of that endeavor, because ultimately for India, it is important that the gains of the last 2 decades are preserved, where Afghanistan, with all its challenges, with all its problems, has managed to emerge as a democracy with all its limitations. But there has been movement, there have been elections, there have been political parties, there have been rights of minorities protected, women's rights protected and enhanced. I think all those issues are important for India as the most important democracy in the neighborhood. We don't want to hand over Afghanistan to Taliban and run a medieval government there. So clearly, India's engagement with the Taliban would also depend on what Taliban decide to do about their own governance and how far they are willing to share power with other stakeholders. So a lot of the pieces are still moving, and we would not know the answer for a very long time. But I think India's engagement with the Taliban is a reflection of that reality, that eventually Taliban will have an important role in the way Afghanistan decides its own future.
And it is essential for India to engage with the Taliban because we clearly do not want to lose on the gains of the last 2 decades, as you pointed out. Just one quick question. There are many questions, but just because we're talking of Afghanistan, Pavel Pandey wants to know whether Pakistan extending an olive branch to India recently has anything to do with the possibility of Taliban coming to power in Afghanistan and withdrawal of the US troops.
Yes, I think all the pieces, if you look at the regional equations, all of them are tied in the way the LOC, temperatures have been brought down a bit by India and Pakistan. The way we see regional countries deciding to shoulder more of the burden because the recognition is there that Americans will leave, and perhaps the regional countries will have to engage on this issue much more substantively. Pakistan, of course, there are sections within Pakistan who may feel that they have won because their protege, their proxy Taliban is now winning. But clearly, Taliban is also not the Taliban of the 1990s. Taliban of today is also a different beast in some ways. We don't know how different eventually they will be. But if they want to have autonomy in governance from Pakistan, then it is important for Taliban to engage with other actors. That is, I think, also not lost on Pakistan, and Pakistan therefore will also try to work with other regional states to ensure that their relevance in Afghanistan continues with or without Taliban. So I think all the pieces, what is happening in the region, in some ways, all equations in the region today are contingent upon how the Afghanistan conundrum is eventually resolved.
How is it eventually resolved? That's very significant, and things are still changing. It's very fluid right now, the situation. Thank you so much, Harsh, and thank you, all of you, for joining us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. We just have this much time, but thank you for sending in questions. We will be taking up more questions again next week, so do send in your questions. And thanks, Yogesh, for thanking us for inviting questions. So we will see you next week. Thanks so much.